Hello, I am back. So, where we left off, we just got to Desert Land, the second um, of the however many worlds there are in Super Mario Bros. 3. I don't know. I don't think it matters that much. I did two worlds, Desert Land and Waterland. And as in I read those two bits of SMB brick by brick. And yeah, they are not. Desert Land in particular is not very substantial. If you're a movie Bob head, it's dry on anything about his personal life that's particularly interesting. And other than that, which is I think the only reason you would probably want to read this book as a testament to the prowess of this game, it feels a bit quaint. It feels very quaint. Like a lot of his hyping up of various parts of the game over the course of his little journey. They're cute, but they're not substantial. It's just you just kind of have to take it at his word. He can't really show you visually. Um, but we'll see. Well, let's just get right into it. Going through my notes. I took less notes this time, so this is probably going to be shorter, mainly because less stuff was jumping out at me as particularly interesting. And I wanted to avoid picking on things I was already picking on previously. Um, so I try to keep it more constrained. But there is one funny thing that comes immediately as you start this particular bit. He wonders if because of the desert design of Desert Land, that did they base that design off of a Middle Eastern pipeline, specifically like an oil pipeline? Yeah, I I don't need to comment on that. That just speaks for itself. That's just like, God, wow, okay. Um, yeah, so I made a note here. One of the reasons these are kind of annoying is because he keeps talking about like, oh, I love this visual. And it's like, great, we can't see it. We're not behind the couch with you. We're not watching it with you. It means nothing. We just kind of have to take your word for it. It's weird. Oh, it's weird. But, that's kind of a limitation of this entire project. But yeah. Ugh. Also, I make this note twice, so I'll just make it here. He keeps, at a certain point, he just starts signing out, like he treats the narrative, his description, like a weird guide, but also a bit of a journal because he'll sign off. Then he'll have a journal entry right after he signs off, like, oh, I'm going to bed now. May 12th, I did this thing. It's strange. The whole journal thing kind of, the whole narrative structure feels flimsy, like he's not completely committing to that separation, um, which is odd. Speaking of one of those journals, um, I write this because I just find it kind of amusing. When he writes these journals, you think they would be relevant to like, oh, his grandmother, trying to make this parallel narrative thing, like a storyteller does. Like make a story with a structure, with an ongoing plot thread, by curating the story events of your, like the major events of your life to make a conclusion. Well, he kind of had a thing going with the comparison between him escaping to his childhood with this game and his terrible situation going on with his grandmother, but nothing has happened. He doesn't really talk about that for whatever reason. And so a lot of these journal entries are just him talking about random miscellaneous stuff that's happening in his life just because. Just like with no connective tissue to any of these ideas. Like I was almost giving him credit last time with that whole to make that connection, but he's not following through with it, which is frustrating. Anyway, he talks about reviewing the movie Safe, starring Tom Cruise. And he's like, Tom Cruise, it's just another Tom Cruise action movie, whatever. And it's like, great. Why did you write this? Why did you write this in here? You didn't have to do this. Also, because this is before singular they really hit the consciousness. He talks about this sun that shows up in the quicksand level and describes it as a he, she, it, which that's not really, I just thought, hey, what a time capsule, huh? The days before we just started using singular they for shit more often. But yeah, the chain shop shows up, and he really likes the chain shop. He's a huge fan, like loves everything about it. Which, I mean, it's the chain shop, right? He's not wrong. It's a chain shop. It's a great design. That's. I think this is the one case where I feel like that his reaction. I get his reaction. I'm like, yeah. I'm actually kind of on board with him on that one. Oh, right. He talks about the game design of a little secret, which is basically just like kind of the secret where it's like, oh, empty space. There's an empty space, but not a lot's happening. There must be a secret because why would they put a room where nothing happens in this game? It's a similar thing where it's like, they have a thing that stands out from the background. It's like kind of, game design. Ooh, have things that draw the eye. Art design 101. I mean, it's like it's cute, but it's like not. It's not that substantial. It's not that crazy an insight. It feels more like trivia than anything particularly interesting. I mentioned the quicksand one. Anytime there's a change in the map, like the way he'll talk about it, is he'll kind of hype it up a bit, like, ooh, wow, the map has something that's not a normal level. It has a weird name, like the quicksand level. Ooh, and there's a pyramid level. Ooh, and it's like, cool. This isn't that big a. It's a change up, but it's like, it feels. I'm not. I'm not as. He's at here. I'm at here. He's not bringing me up here. I'm just kind of. I just keep going. Okay, I shrug. And the writing is because he's trying to do this cutesy, him being really into it, like into the gameplay. And I think he's genuinely very into it, talking about it, his own gameplay. That enthusiasm doesn't quite transfer. He's not good enough a writer to really make that vivid because he keeps going back and explaining and stuff all the time or repeating things. It gets in the way with him actually telling a good story here. Oh, Larry shows up. Larry's here. That's the boss of this world. He defeats Larry. At this point, he points out that their designs are based off 80s rock bands. Again, cool. That's a nice trivia fact. I really wish you were building an actual concrete narrative instead of just putting trivia everywhere. Describes this place as assaulting you with newness. Because you changed the formula twice. Oh, I'm really been hitting with newness. I know that's mean, but like, explain this to me. Like really convince me here. Put this into a proper context. It's just kind of, I have no frame of reference for this, so I just kind of have to trust him, and I don't, given the way that his own perception of reality doesn't quite line up in ways that are weird sometimes, it just makes it hard for me to trust him. I might be overly skeptical, but like, I'm not sold here. Oh, before we move on to Waterland, though, another weird journal entry. This is like a bizarre journal entry. He writes about, so apparently, along with drinking before playing Mario, he always plays Mario a little bit buzzed, apparently. Um, Whenever he plays these games, it's like a ritual. He also, for this one time, thought he poured himself some cereal and ate it, but the box was sealed when he looked at it. So he hallucinated eating cereal. That is his journal entry. I gotta wonder, like, what was going through his head that made him go, I gotta write that down. I gotta write down this experience. It says it's important. The people need to know. The people need to know. Anyway, Waterland. Waterland. He likes Frog Mario. Frog Mario shows up in this one. He likes Frog Mario. Frog Mario comes back quite a few times because Frog Mario. I wrote down a cheesy line he has. It's not that interesting, but I just wrote it for myself, I guess. But all right, I'll say this one because it is more relevant. Boss Bass, we meet again. Because he meets Boss Bass, and Boss Bass is a recurring boss, and throughout this world, and there's an actual moment of catharsis, like a storytelling moment, like barely a thread going on here. Like we were introduced, Boss Bass, annoying. Later down the line, there's going to be some closure. So remember this. Remember this detail. It's very important. Speaking of which, actually, the journal entries will often do things like they'll complain about how much time it's taking, or about, oh, I thought I could do it this fast, but oh, it's taking longer than I thought. And like he's almost like he's using these to play up the difficulty, and he also will play up the difficulty in general. And it's just, again, I have no frame of reference. I haven't played Super Mario Brothers 3. I don't know how if the level in question is actually that difficult. Given the fact that Mario games tropes at this point are so rote and so established, I have a hard time believing that it is. But again, Mario could be quite difficult. That's not, we know that. That's not. It's just that his storytelling isn't good at selling it, and because he's describing everything very dryly. It's just, it doesn't leave much of an impression. But what does leave an impression is his conversation about Mario being a proletariat icon. So let me explain here. For the journal entry for Labor Day, he actually has something that is relevant and substantial about Mario. So for Labor Day, he talks about the aesthetic of Mario as specifically an Italian American working class person, working class man, and argues that the reason that he gets popular is because Americans were connecting with the fact that he was a working class Italian American. He puts the American part in there. He's an Italian American worker, which really just hit me just now, just how weird that the American part really is in that. Because there's just seemingly no justification for the American part. Like, I guess were the games taking place in New York? Or did they have a specific place that those earlier games are taking place in? Sure. Anyway, that's just what a weird. I think that feels like a thing he's just adding in there because it makes him. He connects to the idea of him being a working class American person. He likes the idea of him as a working class American. Um, so not only does he argue that that's why they connect with him, but he also says, well, you see, actually, because he's an Italian American working class person, it also leads to the implication that he's a child of immigrants. The bros are both children of Italian immigrants. This read is silly. I don't think the part where he says that there's a connection because the aesthetic appeals to Americans, that's not as silly. You could actually make an argument. I think there is an argument you could make in there about how Mario's aesthetic might connect with certain groups of people just because he seems very normal and plain because, the Jumpman overalls and such. I could conceivably see someone make that argument and get away with it and actually be convincing. People make arguments like this all the time, even if they're not intended. Design choices like this or aesthetic choices of this can still strike a chord. People can be drawn to all sorts of things, even if they're small or seemingly insignificant. That's not unbelievable to me. The thing that I find silly is knowing the context of Movie Bob, that he really wants to literally be Mario. It seems to me, at least. He's drawn to this idea of being like Mario, and so he fixates specifically on him being from Brooklyn, being a working class citizen, being a typical American, his idea of a typical American, and being drawn to that. And along that child immigrants, it's just like this needlessly playing into, it's like cheesy in like a very really American sense of like playing into the immigrant story. I mean, that's like the American immigrant story, and appealing to that is just it's such a trope, right? It's such a very common trope. And it's just fascinating to watch him make that argument here for Mario in a way that's like clearly meant more for him than for us, right? That's what I find funny about this. And that's what's so funny about a lot of little things throughout this book, is that they're very revealing in ways that he doesn't think they're revealing. He thinks he's making these good faith observations with the context, but with like his life story being told in the beginning, and the way he'll reveal things he thinks are more banal than they actually are, which we have another one of those, by the way, later on. We'll get there in a bit. But so this, I think it has this habit of him. It means that he'll say something that reveals so much of his desires. His heart is very much on his sleeve throughout his book and also throughout his work. He's not very good at irony, genuine irony. I do not think he's actually that good at all, which makes his attempts at aloofness or being matter of fact they're funny, because he'll say something like Mario is an Italian American immigrant, and that's what makes him, even though a Mario's relationship to Brooklyn or New Donk City, they call it New Donk City now. It's like it's basically not relevant. It doesn't matter. They don't care about that at all. It's so vestigial, and yet he still fixates on it despite it not being relevant. I find that kind of amusing and interesting and kind of adorable. I don't know. It's a bunch of things. I just complain about this getting tedious at a certain point, because at this point things were getting pretty dry throughout this section. I was hoping to get something more interesting. Here's an actual interesting journal entry, though. So he's doing Game Over Thinker. He's doing it with his brother. He's looking for a location. He's talking to him, and he doesn't get to talk to his family as often as he might have liked. And he describes it as it helps recenter him because while he thinks of himself as a, quote, private, handle your shit kind of person, he sees, like, being with his brother makes him see himself from an outside perspective and makes his life feel less casually apocalyptic, which, that's for like a thing to drop. Huh. That's, I think, revealing, a little revealing to me. Um, Makes him seem like a kind of anxious person, which, you know what, given his tendency to spiral whenever there's any bad news in general, especially if it's like really bad, like his tendency to spiral in weird ways, I think that makes so much sense. That fits. That fits a bit. Another interesting journal entry for the Bob heads. So he does this random tangent talking about just seeing Avengers, because Avengers comes out in 2012, and he was really excited for it. And he's super excited, and he loves it. And one of the things he gets into is that he likes the fact that not only is he into it, but other people are into it. In much the same way, way back early on, that he was excited that other people were into Mario the same way that he was into it. Because it was one of the few times he actually felt connected to other people in the zeitgeist, which explains, I think, so much of his reticence to admit that the superhero boom is moving on, because then he'll have to accept that people are moving on from that moment. Because at the time, this is the beginning, really, of Avengers Mania. And he describes it as this, what were you doing pop culture moment, which I think he's right on that front, in a way, because actually, no, hold on, I take that back. I take it back a little bit. Endgame I would describe as what were you doing pop culture moment. That I would describe that way. Especially by comparison to Endgame, which feels way more quaint and is very Joss Whedon. And I don't really remember, because I don't think I've really seen it now that I think about it. Which just makes his description of it, kind of feel like, I think it makes more sense at the time, though, because it was a big event for the time. There wasn't really anything like that before, so I'll allow it. It's not an unreasonable description, but it is a interesting one, because it highlights back to my point earlier. Things that he's revealed earlier through the way he speaks have already come back here to roost, that you can make these connections. Oh, after this, he has like this moment where he defeats Boss Bass finally. So again, cinematic parallels. We got the conflict started, dry video game guide nonsense, some journal entries. We get here, and he describes defeating Boss Bass like an action movie with one-liners. Like, he even writes the one-liners in. Smile, you son of a bitch. Like, it's very goofy. It's very goofy, which, to be fair, I think that's kind of intentional, but no, there's no but to that. It's intentionally goofy. I think he knows full well that it's goofy. But I also think he genuinely thinks it's cool, though, as well. Now that I think about it, because the way he talks about it, he describes it as badass, or as badass this can be for a cartoon, whatever. I'm paraphrasing there. Just like the bastard that I am, that's what he writes as well at the Fire Flower moment. It's very corny and very Bob. It's just very Bob. It's very movie Bob. When we wrap this up, Bob-ombs get introduced. He calls this like one of the big things that forever changes the Mario canon, and it's important because it connects it back to SMB3, which he liked because it expands the lore, which he was invested in. Okay. Oh, he writes an entry where he goes to his sister's graduation and then explains why it's been a while since he's played video games. But we're reading the book. This isn't relevant. This doesn't matter to us. Like, great. Good for you and your sister. This doesn't mean anything anymore. You could just cut this and we would lose nothing. Why are you including this? He just doesn't know how to edit. He needed an editor. Who is his editor? Who was editing this? Was it him? Dear God, it must have been him. Oh, that explains so much. That would explain so much. Fangamer published. Anyway, he beats Wendy, the first girl boss, the only girl boss. She tried to gaslight. Yep, I said the word right. I'm just gonna keep that. Yep, gaslight. But yeah, Wendy shows up, defeated. Calls this entire area groundbreaking. And that's it. Just a quick summary, just my final thoughts. Desert World is the worst of these two sections. It is a lot. Oh my God, the pun just hit me. No, I refuse. It's a lot more boring, and the Water World is more interesting because it has weirder and more substantive stuff in there. But oh, there's a lot of guide. There's a lot of just informational text. Oh, this is gonna be a bit of a doozy. Well, I'm exaggerating. It's not actually that bad to read. You know, it's consumable. Your eyes glaze over a bit, but there's still a bit of these, like, I think because of the way he writes things, I think there's just enough for me to keep my attention going. Like, I'm getting bored and I'm skimming a little bit in sections, but again, then like the journal entries will show up. It's like when those shows up, they're like a lifeline. They keep me going. I hope there's more of those, less of these dry spells. But unfortunately, I think I'm just gonna have to deal with that for future ones. But up next is Giant Land. I think I'm gonna do Giant Land and whatever comes after. I'm gonna keep going with these two bits. I'm also gonna call. I'm gonna group these into their own individual parts, I think. So until next time, bye bye.